Well, we've made it to another Thursday. I'm happy to be back here with you as we get ready to talk about all of the championship games taking place across the country this week, especially here in the SEC. My Georgia Bulldogs are going to be taking on the Texas Longhorns this week to see if they can beat them for the second time this year, to see if they can claim another trophy, to see if they can improve their seeding in this college football playoff. Now, this looks a little bit different. I'm sure you can tell. I'm here by myself tonight, and it looks like I'm going to be flying solo, so I'll do my very best to carry you through, to escort you across the landscape that is championship week here as we head into the final Saturday here in college football this year. And it's really cool because there are a lot of games, and when you're talking about the college football playoff, one of the things that people keep talking about, even up to this week, is whether or not these championship games are actually important, whether they matter, whether they have any real world impact on anything other than your pride. And in certain instances, they do, obviously, because if you win a championship, then that means that under the current rules of this college football playoff, you are going to receive a bye, an automatic bid, and you are going to be rewarded with a better seeding when it comes to filling out the bracket. That bye gives you time to rest after a long season, so on and so forth. So there are some very real world sort of benefits to winning the thing. But then there are just as many people who seem to be on the other side who are saying, well, I don't think I'd want my team to play in that game because I don't want to risk injury. I would rather get the week's extra rest if I know that I'm already going to make the college football playoff, if it looks like that's how it's going to go. And so people debate whether or not it's actually worth it, whether they mean anything, whether the fact that you can get another trophy for the championship case, whether or not that's important to you. I don't know how the majority of people feel about it, but I know how I feel about it. And I have a 98% reading on what I think Kirby Smart and his team feels about it. And I'm pretty sure that Steve Sarkisian feels exactly the same way, because I think I've heard him say something similar. And that is that in Athens, Georgia, for sure, and most likely in Austin, Texas, there's a gold medal mentality, meaning if there's a championship to go play for, then we are going to try to go win it. Sitting back and letting other teams play it out on the field, and then you just sort of fall in line wherever you end up, that just doesn't fit with the way Kirby Smart runs his program. For me individually, I feel the same way. The thing about winning an SEC championship is that it is not easy. It is very, very difficult. Now, it's difficult in that you have to navigate the regular season, but even once you get to the game, the opponent that's on the other side is going to be a top-tier opponent. So whether you've played them before, beaten them before, or whatever the case might be, you have to go out there and face another top-tier opponent in addition to the regular season you've already played. And that makes these things hard to come by. It makes these championships difficult to obtain. As for the University of Georgia, there are just a handful more of the SEC championship banners than there are national trophies. So national championship trophies. So those things are definitely hard to come by. Just look at Georgia. They've been there 7 out of the 8 last years, 4 years consecutively. Do they have 7 SEC championships? No, because it's hard to do. So if you have a chance to go win the thing, I'm in the boat that you go win it. It means everything. It means validation. I don't know if validation is the right word, but it's a great reward for all the work that you put in 365 days a year if you're one of these college football athletes, if you're part of this coaching staff, if you're part of these football programs. This is what you live for. This is what it's all about, is the opportunity to go win a national championship. So I think both teams are going to show up on Saturday and give it their very best. And the chips are going to fall where they may. So what we're going to do is just kind of walk through everything, but we have to touch on the basic information which is out in front of us, and that is that my Georgia Bulldogs are ranked number 5 in the college football playoff this week. And if we look ahead at the college football rankings here, you can see where the rest of the field shakes out. And that means that you have Oregon 1, Texas 2, and I didn't throw their picture up on the screen because they didn't move. Well, I guess they did move up one spot, but it wasn't anything major. You look at 3 and 4, they just followed suit. Georgia did the same, and they wound up at 5, whereas Ohio State has now dropped to 6. So this is where we are heading into college football championship weekend. Now, I think this is pretty cool because what we have shaking out here is that these teams find themselves sitting in positions where, like, if you look at the SEC championship, it's pretty safe to assume, not guaranteed, but pretty safe to assume that both teams are going to end up in the college football playoff, win or lose. The same situation holds true for the Big Ten. Oregon's going to play Penn State if both teams are expected to get into the final field of 12 in the college football playoff. Notre Dame doesn't have a championship game, so they're expected to be in. Ohio State is still expected to be in. Tennessee. Now, SMU is where things start to get interesting, sitting there at 8, because they are in the ACC championship game taking on the Clemson Tigers. Why do we care about this as an SEC show? Because Alabama is sitting right down there at number 11. If SMU wins the game, that's okay. They're already expected to win the game. They are going to maintain that spot in the playoff. If SMU were to lose that game, that means that the team they're playing, the Clemson Tigers, who are sitting way back at 17, would move into the field. But that doesn't mean that SMU is going to be out. Most people seem to believe that SMU is deserving of a slot in this 12-team playoff anyway. Well, if you're going to add one team and you're not going to remove a team, then teams like Alabama, Miami, right there at the cutoff line, well, now where they may have been in, they can't be in anymore because you have 2 representing the ACC, not just one. And therefore, that ACC championship game has huge ramifications for us here in the SEC. Not on my team, the Dogs or the Texas Longhorns, but on the SEC as a whole, because you already have Texas, Georgia, Tennessee. If Alabama gets in, that's 4 schools out of the SEC. And there are a lot of people who think that is a crime against humanity. There are other people who believe that that is what should happen because the SEC is the toughest football conference in the land. I'm just bringing it up to point out the fact that what happens in other places this weekend will have an impact on how the SEC is affected. Doesn't have anything to do with the SEC championship game, but it is going to make a difference in how many teams the SEC ultimately gets into the playoff. And I think that's interesting. It's just a point of debate here around this college football playoff, which is something that, well, let's be honest, that's what the whole thing has been the entire time anyway. Just something to debate and discuss and argue over. I'm happy that the Dogs are there. What I am interested in, and I don't really know that I've formulated an answer in my own mind, though, is let's say the underdogs in the Big Ten and the SEC win this week. So that would be Georgia winning, and that would be Penn State winning. If that were to happen, who is your number 1 seed in the bracket? Because now the Texas Longhorns would have 2 losses. Oregon will have suffered their first loss head-to-head against Penn State. And Notre Dame will be sitting there with 1 loss, and the Dogs will have 2 losses. So who they chose to put at number 1 would be an interesting discussion. How do you want to weight it? Simply the number of losses a team has suffered, who they played head-to-head, who plays in the best conference. There are a lot of things that you could go through right there and make an argument about. But I just think it's an interesting question. I don't really know how it would shake out, to be completely honest with you, but I do think it would be fun to watch. But let's give ourselves an opportunity to move on to the things that really matter, and that is the SEC championship game and, of course, the game of the week here on the channel is the Texas Longhorns against my Georgia Bulldogs. So if we're looking at this game, there are a bunch of different ways we could break it down. We could leave it and say, well, the most important thing that's going to happen here is whoever plays better at the quarterback position on this Saturday, that's the team that's going to win the SEC championship game. Now, I really can't argue with that. I think that there's a whole lot of truth to that because people have been talking about this game all week, and anytime someone has been kind enough to enter into a genuine discussion with me about this game, rather than just telling me, well, Georgia's awful and Texas is going to beat them by 50, and you know, the stupid fan stuff that happens. When people actually want to discuss the game, the one thing that I try to remind them, or not remind them, but share with them, is that I see this game as a toss-up. I see it as a 50-50 game because both of them had quality coaching staffs. Both of them have wonderful head coaches. Both of them have very talented rosters, and both of them have shown that they have weaknesses. So if you're going to take all that and put it on the field, then the only thing that you can assume is going to make the difference is the same stuff that makes a difference in every football game, which is who doesn't beat themselves, who doesn't turn the football over, who doesn't commit a ton of penalties, right? So all the basic stuff of football. Injuries could play a big deal in the game. If someone were to get hurt, then that could change the way the game turns out. So that's just part of the game too. But if all the football stuff just holds the way it is, if it's chalk, the difference is going to be which of these quarterbacks actually plays better in that 3-hour window on Saturday. And that doesn't mean that they're not going to be impacted. In fact, I expect that both defenses are going to impact both quarterbacks. The difference is one of them is going to make a mistake somewhere along the way. That's the team that's probably going to lose. I know that you hate to put all that on one guy, but ultimately, that's what I think is going to happen. Stand by for 1 second. Tell you what, friends, if things were going to be easy, then this is not the job for me. Live happens live, so I appreciate you guys hanging in here with me. If it's not one thing, it's another. All right, so like I was saying, this game's going to come down to whichever one of these quarterbacks actually plays better inside the game window. I guess if you want to boil it down to be something that simple, then you could, I don't want to say I could flip a coin, because if I'm being completely honest with you, I would rather have Carson Beck in this game than Quinn Ewers. I know you might say that I'm just being biased there because I'm a Bulldog fan, but I felt that way before the season. I felt that way based on everything I've seen this season. And I honestly think that if that's what it comes down to, Carson Beck's going to get the better end of it. But we'll see. Now, that's the kind of 30,000 foot level view, because again, both of these defenses are really good. Both of these special teams are really good. And both teams are suffering injuries at key positions. So they're wandering into this situation where you literally have to settle it on the field, because I can't see a huge distinction between the two teams right now. I mean, if you look at Carson Beck in particular, he is coming off of a 3-game stretch where he's thrown 11 touchdowns and no interceptions and almost 1,000 yards. So he is definitely trending in the right direction when it comes to his on-field performance. heading into this game. Now, Quinn Ewers, on the other hand, and that Texas offense as a whole, it's very, very simple to just sit there and say, well, they are explosive, they are this and that. The truth of the matter is they really are not an elite offense. They really are not hitting on all cylinders. The thing about them is they've changed their style over the last few weeks, and so they look a little bit different. They're doing some things differently. But outside of their performance against Florida, where Florida was playing with a third-string quarterback, and in my personal opinion, I think Florida kind of quit in that game, and it got out of hand on them with a big number. You look at what Texas has done offensively, and it's really not that impressive. So if I'm looking, and we know that Ewers is dealing with a little bit of an injury, an ankle injury coming into this game. So again, if I'm choosing, I would rather have Carson Beck heading into this game than Quinn Ewers. Now, obviously, both guys are going to have people help them get this thing done ultimately, but that's just where I stand right now as far as that's concerned. Now, one of the cool things about this game is that in addition to being a blue blood matchup between two mega brands, it's also a helmet game. These are the uniforms that they're going to be wearing this Saturday. It'll be a little bit different than when the teams met in Austin. That night in Texas, the Longhorns wore their burnt orange tops and white bottoms, and the Dogs were in traditional whites on top and silver breeches. This week, though, even though Texas is the home team, the Dogs will be wearing the red unis. So it's going to be a fun game visually to watch. So if you're somebody who appreciates a nice scene as you look at everything, then this game is for you. And that's kind of where we are. The SEC, as it always is the biggest show on championship weekend. You can't get tickets to this game year after year. Whereas if you look at other championship games, take the Big 12, for example, you can get tickets as inexpensively as $12 per seat. As our good friend Roddy Nabolsi of UGA Sports pointed out this week, there are tickets to Georgia high school football games this weekend that go for $16 a piece. So, demand is just different here in the SEC because, as we all know, in the SEC, it just means more. And I'm okay with that. That's how I want it to be, if I'm being completely honest with you. Excuse me. So let's go ahead and take a look at these games heading into the weekend, beyond just what's going on here in the SEC. We'll start tomorrow night. UNLV at Boise State. And I've heard some people, especially Alabama folks, who are confused. They're confounded, and they don't understand why, if UNLV were to upset Boise State and beat them, how that's not a good thing for Alabama. Here's why it doesn't matter. This Mountain West Championship game, the Mountain West is not going to get two bids into this playoff. They're only going to get the one. So, if UNLV beats Boise State, that just means UNLV replaces Boise State. And as a conference champion, they're going to be ranked ahead of the Alabama Crimson Tide. So this game has absolutely no bearing on what happens in terms of whether or not Alabama makes the playoff. What it does do is give representation, a conference championship, and an automatic bid to a team that, well, to be quite honest, I think we can all agree isn't going to win the national championship. So it doesn't impact Alabama's standing at all. But they are going to go play for a trophy tomorrow night. UNLV and Boise State. Now, Ashton Jeanty has been a Heisman candidate all season for the Boise State Broncos. And he's had a wonderful year. He's chasing down the greatest running back of all time, Barry Sanders, for his statistical records over the course of one season. But as we all know, it's not a fair comparison because Barry did all of his work in the greatest college football season in the history of the sport in an 11-game season. Bowl games didn't count, and there wasn't an extended period of games. Ashton Jeanty is going to chase down those numbers. He might actually get there, but it will absolutely deserve an asterisk because he can't do it like Barry did it. Nobody can. Nobody ever will. But good on him because it's a great year. As far as the game is concerned, UNLV is sneaking around the chicken coop in this game as far as I'm concerned. If you look at it, Boise's only a 4-point favorite headed into the game. And they are good at what they do. Ashton Jeanty is a really good football player. But I really kind of like what's happening out there at UNLV right now. And not for nothing, I just kind of think UNLV might get them. I think UNLV might upset Boise State right here. Am I brave enough to go out there and make the pick and say it's going to happen? I don't believe I am. I'm going to stick with Boise State and say that they win the Mountain West Conference this year and they claim the automatic bid into the 12-team college football playoff. I think it could be close, and if UNLV upsets them, I will not be surprised because they play some good defense out there. I think the matchup is a pretty good one for UNLV, and I guess I won't get credit for it because I didn't make the pick outright. But I do want to say, though, that UNLV is going to be there. I think they're going to keep it close, but I do think Boise State's going to win the game. So there you go. Looking at the American Athletic Conference, you have Tulane, who was just a handful of weeks ago quite possibly the best G5 team in the land, but then they ran into the buzzsaw last week. That is the Memphis Tigers. And we see that Tulane is now 9-3 and Army's sitting there at 10-1. So, who do I like in this game? Army's been great all year. Tulane has been kind of on the skids. But I saw Tulane go in and handle Navy really well a few weeks back. And I got to believe it's not the same kind of setup, but it's close enough. I got to believe that I'm going to go with a Tulane Green Wave here to get the victory over Army and win the American Athletic Conference. I think they've seen that style of offense this year. They've played well against it, and then they could out-athlete them when it came to turning that around and playing offense. So I'm going to think that that holds true. Army's going to give them a game, but I think that Tulane's going to win the game outright to claim that trophy. All right, Iowa State and Arizona State. So if Joe were here this week, you would hear me shout out the word scataboo because I love watching Scataboo play for Arizona State. That kid is nothing but a straight-up warrior. He's a gamer. He is hard-nosed. He is the kind of guy that you want on your team, and if you played the game, then I guarantee you knew a dude like Scataboo on your team back in the day. He's that guy, the overachiever, the guy who just loves the game, and he's a whole lot of fun to watch. Now, Iowa State, to be completely honest, I haven't gotten a chance to watch them play a lot this year. But I do know that they are competitive. They're sitting there with 10 wins, and they are going to show up and represent their school very, very well. But I have seen Arizona State play this year, and it just seems that there might be a little bit of something cooking out there with Arizona State. It seems that there might be a little bit something different going on with the Sun Devils. They've had a tremendous season, turned this thing around already to 10 wins. I think they only won 3 last year. So the Sun Devils are out there getting it done. I think they're going to get it done again. I think Arizona State is going to be your Big 12 champion, which is not at all what I predicted in the before the season began. So I don't remember the rest of my picks, but I know that one, and I'm certain I didn't pick Arizona State. But here I am telling you now that I think they're going to get the job done and beat Iowa State to win the Big 12 on Saturday. Georgia, Texas, we'll come back to you here in just a minute. We have Penn State and Oregon on Saturday night. This one's intriguing to me because every time I watch Penn State, they just look like exactly who I think they are, which is when they play somebody that's better than them, they find a way to not win. They can't make the play that matters when it matters most. James Franklin has never been able to win when it actually was on the line and was important to somebody on a national scale. Oregon, on the other hand, I've watched them all year, but it's like I said last night on the podcast. Are they just better than everybody else this year? I'm not sold that they are. They're explosive offensively. They'll get after you defensively, and they have playmakers. But this is the same team that I saw struggle with the Idaho Vandals and those Boise State Broncos. I just don't know that Oregon is actually head and shoulders above everybody else. They do have the big win against Ohio State at home, and Dan Lanning, is going to use every rule available to him to make this thing happen. And just because you're James Franklin and have never been able to get it done in the past, there's nothing that says this is the year that you will be able to get it done. Defensively, I think Penn State has enough going for them that they will be able to do some things against that Oregon offense. Conversely, Penn State offensively, if they're ever going to show up and make it happen, now is the time. Say what you will about ratings when it comes to players as they enter a program and then stay there for a while. Penn State has a quality running game. They have what was supposed to be a 5-star, cannot-miss prospect at quarterback, who frankly has never actually played up to that billing, except against teams that you and I could probably be competitive with. So if they're going to get anything done that's going to matter, now is the time. At the end of the day, though, I just don't know that I trust James Franklin enough to show up and make good game day decisions and make that happen. Dan Lanning seems to be a game day player. And that seems to be where I feel most comfortable. So, I know it's not very bold. But I think I'm going to have to go with the Oregon Ducks here to win the Big Ten. The only thing that gives me pause, and again, it doesn't really, because I see Lanning the way I see, he's from Kirby Smart's coaching tree. I see him as a guy who sees an opportunity to win a championship. You want to go win that championship. So I could see, though, if there were any reason, you're in, you're the number one team. If there were any question about any of his players at any point, as far as injuries were concerned, and he might choose to sit them, just to make certain they're healthy heading into the playoff, that could happen. I don't know of anything out there for them right now that they might consider doing that about, but to say something happened in the game, but I don't really think that's a huge concern for Lanning in Oregon. But for now, barring anything like that, I'm just going to go ahead and say, yeah, give me the Ducks to beat Penn State. I have no faith that James Franklin's actually going to get it done when it matters. And I truly don't think that his quarterback, Drew Aller, is anything more than a good quarterback. I don't think he is everything he was ever cracked up to be. He, like Quinn Ewers, was one of those COVID evaluations. And it seems that round of evaluations has been off just a little bit as far as quarterbacks are concerned, because everybody missed so much time and didn't get to camp the way they usually do. So I'm just not sold. That's a long way of me saying, give me Oregon to beat Penn State in the Big Ten. And I did pick that one in the preseason. So I'll be sticking to my regulars or my preseason prediction there. I think Oregon's going to get the victory. Now, here's the one that brings all the drama with it, right? This is the one that people want to have an opinion about this weekend. The Clemson Tigers, who are sitting there at 9-3 and have been up and down this year, up and down in that they played a Georgia team to open the season and got thumped. And then people thought the sky was falling, and they rolled out there after that point and proceeded to reel off a handful of wins, something like 6 or 7 wins in a row. And when you look back on that stretch of games, if you're being honest with yourself, you're like, okay, they beat up on all the teams they were supposed to beat up on, teams they are better than. Then they met another couple teams that, you know, they had an equal talent balance with, and Clemson lost. And they ended the season against another SEC team in the South Carolina Gamecocks, who beat them. Another team that is physical and fast. So Clemson, yes, they've been up and down, but yes, they are 9-3 and they are in the game. So you have to wonder, can Cade Klubnik and that offense be consistent enough to score enough points to keep up with what is a high-flying, high-scoring SMU offense? Because one thing's for sure about those guys, they can really go. And when I've watched the Ponies this year, they've been a lot of fun to watch. The difference here, I think, if there's anything that can be said as far as differences are concerned, I think the difference here in this game is that Clemson has been in this game virtually every year for the last decade. And they are used to what it is, what it brings, and what it requires. SMU, on the other hand, is new to the conference, and frankly, they've played in championship games before, but nothing with a spotlight on it like this one's going to have. So is SMU going to be able to answer the bell and rise to the challenge on the stage here at the end of the year, where the lights are just about as bright as they're going to be all season? I don't know. Frankly, I don't know. I know that the Clemson defense is they're good enough to get after you. I said that when they played Georgia. I think that's true now. I think that Cade Klubnik has been like his team. He's been up and down, and when he's played well, they have played well. But I also know that I watched Lenore Sellers, and I understand that not everybody has a Lenore Sellers playing quarterback for them, but I watched him last week run through this Clemson defense, and they were doing a good job, but they couldn't handle him. Then you have SMU. Do they just keep rolling right along and doing what they've done all year? They are the slight favorite in this game, just a 2-point favorite, which means essentially it's a pick 'em. I'm going to say that chalk holds here, and that SMU is going to win the ACC. And if that happens, then Alabama is going to make the college football playoff. And all of us can have all the opinions we want about that, especially as Georgia Bulldog fans. We can argue back and forth about whether or not they're deserving, whether or not they need to be in there, all that stuff. But if SMU wins, that's probably what's going to happen. And I think SMU is going to do just enough to get this thing done, because I just don't trust Cade Klubnik to play his best when his best is required. He could surprise me. I believe in that Clemson defense, but I just don't think I believe in Cade Klubnik enough to make this happen. If Clemson wins, that's what's going to be the difference. You're going to see a Cade Klubnik show up and not turn the ball over. You're going to see him show up, make plays with his legs. You're going to see him show up and throw the ball down the field, which is something that he generally doesn't do against football teams of equal talent level. So that is the key to me, Cade Klubnik, but I don't have any faith in him to get it done. Give me SMU to win the ACC, which would put Alabama in the college football playoff. So now scrolling back up here to look at our game of the week. Stand by with me, guys. If you will, please. How's that saying go? Like I said, live. Well, it happens live. So we are hanging in here and doing what it takes to get this thing done. That's how I'm viewing it anyway. Excuse me. So, like I was saying, Georgia and Texas. Georgia and Texas, the game of the week here in the SEC championship game. There are so many ways that you can talk about this game, at least from where I'm sitting. And the one thing that I'm pretty positive about, and I don't have any qualms at all sharing with you, is that this is not going to be the same game that we saw in Austin a few weeks back. These are not the same teams that we saw in Austin a few weeks back. I mentioned it earlier. I have complete and total respect for Texas as a football program. I think that Steve Sarkisian has done a good job of building that program to have them ready to play here in the SEC in their first year in the conference because of the way he has built out his lines of scrimmage. He has a veteran quarterback, which is always important in this league. And I just think that they have done a really good job of making sure that what is going on right there? Okay, let's get that off the screen for you there. Sorry, everybody. Is making sure that they have the horses to run in the SEC this year. And that's a great thing. So kudos to him. The Georgia Bulldogs, on the other hand, great coaching staff, championship pedigree. They obviously have had a really great run over the past few years. But when you look at this Georgia team, you know as well as I do that they are not the same squad that those uber talented teams from 3 or 4 years ago were. They're still very talented, and they have everything that they need to win this game, which is why I look at this game as a toss-up. I honestly see it as a 50-50 kind of matchup, and you can see the spread there is Texas minus 2.5. So a lot of people seem to think, that Texas is the favorite. And nationally speaking, from what I've seen, most people out there who want to offer an opinion seem to think that the Georgia Bulldogs, for whatever reason, are on the decline and that this Texas team is ascending at the right part of the year. Now, I would disagree with actually both of those statements, but I can understand how if you don't follow the team as closely as someone like I follows them, or you as a Georgia Bulldogs fan, if you're watching this channel, then you might say, yeah, you just don't know what you're talking about, and you can dismiss what they say, and you probably should in some instances, because some of these national voices that I've heard comment on the game are talking about narratives that were the situation 3-4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, not the situation as it is right now. One of the biggest things I think about this game for both teams heading into it is that they're actually more beat up than you might just notice on the surface. So both teams have a handful of players that are listed as questionable, and it's going to be interesting to see who actually steps on the field on Saturday. I just don't know that we're going to see the same players who had an impact in the first game have an impact in the second game. I'm sure they'll play, but I just don't know how effective they're going to be able to be. So when I look at this game, like I said, I see it as a toss-up, and I do believe that at the end of the day, what's going to make the difference in the game is which quarterback plays better down the stretch inside that 3 hours. Which team as a whole makes the fewer mistakes. And for my money, I'm not going to gild the lily anymore. I can see how Texas can win the SEC championship this year, but I just don't think that's what's going to happen. I think it's going to be a very hard-fought game. I think it's going to be a close game, so the spread's about right, maybe 3-point game, something like that. But there are things that are different this time than the last time, and that is Carson Beck. The last time he played Texas was in his worst stretch of the season. But if you look at what he's doing right now, he's playing at a much higher level than he's played all year, really. And if you look at what Texas offense is doing right now, I would not say the same about Quinn Ewers, his performance, and how they are performing as a unit right now. So you add in the fact that Ewers is dealing with a little bit of an injury, and I think that Georgia might be between two teams that are beat up and in a rough spot. I think Georgia's the one of the two that is in better position when it comes to their quarterback and what their offense can do. Now, I'm not saying Georgia's going to go out there and run up and down the field on them. Texas is a very good defense, and it's going to be very hard to run the football against them. And if Nate Frazier is the guy who's going to have to do that because Etienne is injured, then the kid's got his work cut out for him, as does Roderick Robinson if he gets on the field. But I think that at the end of the day, this is a line of scrimmage league. And I don't understand, I don't see what's going to be that different if you line these two teams up than the last time they played. The thing about Georgia that makes them different than anything else that Texas has faced this year is the fact that they have athletes that are as good or better than their athletes on the offensive side of the ball. And Georgia can get after the passer. And when you have a quarterback like Ewers, who is A, not mobile, and now B, injured, and an offensive line that Georgia essentially sunned the first time they played, told them to go sit in the corner and, wait in timeout while the adults talked over there. I just don't know what's going to be different. I mean, at the end of the day, football's football. You have to move people. You have to win along the lines of scrimmage. And I just don't know that anything has happened between then and now that makes me think along the lines of scrimmage, this game is going to be any different than it was the first time they played. You add that, and that's giving full respect to Texas as their defense and what they can do. But you add that belief that Georgia's going to win the lines of scrimmage to the fact that I think that Georgia's quarterback is playing better right now. And that over the course of the season, I know enough about Georgia to know that they don't beat themselves in games like this. I think you have enough for Georgia to go in there and come out with a victory on Saturday against the Longhorns. And I don't think it's going to be some huge number. I don't think they're going to run away. But I cannot see that Carson Beck is going to have the sort of game he had the last time he played them. I don't see Georgia spotting them 4 turnovers, right? Of course, I guess you could make that argument the other way too, because Texas, turned the ball over a few times against Georgia. Is Texas going to do that again? You wouldn't think so. Which again brings us right back to where we were. Whoever doesn't turn the ball over, who doesn't beat themselves, and whoever makes the plays when they have to in the biggest moments, that's the team that's going to win. And for my money, just everything I've seen from Carson Beck this year, everything I've seen from this Georgia Bulldogs team, I'm more comfortable saying that they're going to be the ones to get that done. So give me the Dogs to win the SEC championship game this year and be your 2024 SEC champions. Now, as I mentioned earlier, what will be interesting is if that happens, if Georgia beats Texas, if Oregon beats Penn State, then what happens? How do you seed this thing? Oregon's probably going to be your number one. They're undefeated. Why wouldn't they be? And then if Georgia beats Texas head-to-head in a championship game, and for the second time this season, it seems incomprehensible to me that those two would not, at the very least, switch places, right? So if you were going to say, well, Texas loses, we're going to slide them back below, say, Notre Dame, okay. But then you have to switch Texas and Georgia. So then it'd be like Oregon, Notre Dame, Georgia as the 3 seed. And then you ask yourself, well, they played in the SEC. Is that worth anything? And then maybe you put them at 2. So it'd be Oregon, Georgia at that point. So I think it's going to pose some interesting questions for the playoff committee if that's how it goes down. If Georgia wins, I think you have to then put Texas behind them somewhere in the pecking order. And we can have a debate about whether or not Georgia would deserve, a higher ranking than a one-loss Notre Dame team. If I'm wrong and Penn State beats Oregon, and then you find yourself with a reshuffling in the top 5 right there, it will absolutely be interesting. And that's where the seeding thing comes down, right? Because you have your conference champions who get those first 4 slots. So that could very well end up being Penn State, Georgia, Boise State, and SMU. It is wild what's going to happen with those seedings when all that comes out. So it's an interesting weekend. Like I said, this is the kind of championship week that maybe there were a few people out there that predicted it. Maybe there were a few people who thought it might shake out this way, but not me. I didn't think it would look like this at the end of the day. So a lot of people might think that it's meaningless because of the new 12-team playoff. But if you ask me, at the end of the day, there's actually a whole lot of intrigue here into how things are going to go. And the worst part of it all, if you got to find a bad thing to point to here, is that this playoff committee is unaccountable, right? There's no one to hold them to account. And that they literally can make up the rules as they go, even as late as this next Sunday morning. So that's why you don't want to lose and put anything in their hands. If it's at all possible, you want to win your games and force them to recognize that you deserve your championship or your seeding or whatever it is, that's being discussed. It's certainly an interesting way to wind down the regular season here in college football. And here's the thing, friends. We've still got 4-5 games for the teams that are going to continue on to play for the national championship. So we are a long way from done as far as this thing is concerned. But as far as this show is concerned, we are not at all a long way from being done. I appreciate you guys hanging in here with me tonight. Once again, playing a little bit injured, hanging in here, trying to show up and talk football because I think it's a whole lot of fun. And I really appreciate y'all being here with me. And as I always say, live happens live. And here we are finishing up the season with me riding solo, which is another thing that I didn't think we were going to see tonight. Y'all be sure to give Joe a rough time the next time he pops on the screen here for you and let him know that he needs to make sure he shows up and is here with us all the time. We love it when he can sit in with us because it makes it more fun. And, of course, thanks for hanging in there with me tonight as far as the technical difficulties are concerned, because why not? Why wouldn't that crop up here on a week where we have had hurdle after hurdle to try to make sure that we show up and chat football with you? So I appreciate you guys hanging out with me for real. I know I sound a little funky and I might not have the same juice, but I appreciate you guys being here with me. Please enjoy the games because I'm going to do my very best to do that. And I hope that every team that you want to win does win. Unless, of course, you are a Texas Longhorns fan. Because in that case, go Dogs! See y'all on the other side.